So one of the things that goes on that's puzzling on the surface is intergenerational abuse patterns. So you have grandma behaving to mother, and then mother behaving to daughter. And it's like a virus. It's like a contagious disease on a psychological level. There are colds and flus that we pass on to one another, and we somewhat understand that. But what I wanted to explore is what emotional and mental diseases are and how and why they get passed forward. So the first thing to understand is, what is a disease? And one of the easiest shapes is the sphere, a symmetrical shape. It's why health and wholeness are from the same root word. It's why balance and healing. When you medicate something, you take, for example, a splinter was pushed in, you cause balance by pulling it out again. A thought was pushed into a child and you cause balance by pulling it out again. The process of disease, in a metaphorical sense, can be explained as the process of taking the sphere, which consumes the least amount of energy to move, of any known shape. The sphere, which is composed simultaneously of an infinite number of lines, and the wave formation, the particle and the wave. So we've got a masculine-feminine polarity going on in the shape of the sphere in perfect balance and harmony. So you have this sense of wholeness. A healthy body is drawn as a symmetrical body, a balanced body within this spherical framework. So you come in whole, but what you experience is that a big chunk of you gets taken out of you. And so let's start with my relationship with my mother, since that's a very archetypal relationship. So my mother is not able to bridge the gap and connect with other people emotionally. Now we'll get to that later, but she's not able to empathize in a visceral sense with other people. As I said, why you get back to grandmother, and why you get back to the generation before. So every child, every relationship needs mutual empathy. So the need that we have to be seen, to be validated. So first of all, within this empathy equation, you have regulation. For example, when you need empathy and somebody empathizes 30%, then you communicate 3 times more in order to get the 100% empathy that you need. There's a regulation aspect. But when someone can't or won't make the emotional connection, it creates a framework where it's off the charts. You've got no feedback. Now, when you have no feedback, you can't integrate, become conscious, and learn. So no regulation minus regulation equals insanity, volatility, unconsciousness, loneliness, and dissociation. So, when a mother cannot connect emotionally with a child, you reduce the flow. Flow goes both ways. You reduce the core pattern of growth and evolution, which is stimulus, response, and then integration. You do something, you notice its effect, and then you decide something based on that effect relative to one's own values. So, for example, a child who needs attention, as many of our children are starved for really present attention, because whether we're there or not, we're not seeing them. We're not giving them present attention. So a child smiles and doesn't get noticed. A child looks around, doesn't get noticed. A child asks for some attention and doesn't get noticed. Then the child hits their sister and they get attention. So the child immediately learns, aha, I need to hit my sister more because I need this attention in order to avoid insanity, volatility, unconsciousness, loneliness, and dissociation. I've got to have meaningful engagement, and I've got to know what works. Now, what works is nothing to do with the child. What works is determined by the parent. And pain always works. And so if the parent doesn't have the discipline to create loving relationship based on character, then the child will induce a level of pain needed to generate the attention, which then becomes the basis to start regulating, to start learning what does and doesn't work. You've got to have the presence of someone before you can do that. So, if a child does not get the attention and regulation needed to avoid insanity, volatility, unconsciousness, loneliness, and dissociation, well, you can take that forward to the next generation and say, well, how are they going to be that way to their child? Because the way that a parent treats the child sets the default template. Meaning if you do nothing to interfere with that program at an intensity level equal or greater than the intensity of the program, if you do nothing, then the program continues. It's a little bit like a computer. If you download a program, it is your program, unless you delete that program and replace it with another program. Now, you have to do that thoroughly enough to offset the impact of the program. It's if you imagine someone showing up and dumping a dump truck load of sand in your driveway, and you want to clear driveway again, you can't just go out there for 10 minutes here and there and throw a few shovels away. You can, it'll just take years to clear off the dump truck load. And we're a very get-rich-quick type of culture, meaning we have this idea in our mind that if we can do it for free or can save time doing it, that's somehow better. Now, the trouble is if you're insane. Now, insanity is a curve. If your words don't relate to your other words, you might be this level of insane. If your words don't relate to your actions, you might be this level of insane. If your words don't relate to any of your actions, you might be this level of insane. If your words don't relate to any of your actions and any of your feelings, you might be this level of insane. And so it's a continual process of percentages and dimensions. Do your words relate to your actions? Do your actions relate to your feelings? Do your actions relate to your thoughts? Do your thoughts relate to your feelings? Meaning, the more you disintegrate all of these different parts of who you are, the more insane you are. Now, the more insane you are, the less you're able to be present for a child, because you can't even be present for your own reality, let alone yourself. Meaning your feelings are your reality. If you can't relate to them, then you're insane. Well, how can you be sane, which is integrated and in touch with a baby who's just learning about their thoughts and feelings, when you can't be sane for yourself? See, and how can you relate and become sane if your mother cannot deal with her own feelings, so she can't deal with your feelings? You see, it's an equation that passes this forward. Now, when you enter an equation that creates insanity in a child, and then say, well, feelings just happen naturally, so we don't have to talk about them. I mean, that's basically what we say. You have to learn algebra, but you don't have to learn feelings. Why? Why do you have to learn algebra, something you've never used in your entire life, and not learn about feelings, something you learn every day? Why? Why that? Well, feelings just happen naturally. And mental emotional viruses do happen naturally. They are inevitable, and they will last until a force equal or greater meets them. Now, when you have the idea that we're not going to meet them because they just happen naturally, well, then they don't get met. So the same pattern continues. So this is all one arena of the equation of why you have intergenerational abuse cycles. But going back to this wholeness of the individual, let's look at narcissism. So narcissism, in short, is an overbalance of, so you take the sphere, and remembering the principle of wholeness and balance, in a healthy relationship, we'd spend 1 unit of attention examining and spending time with you, and 1 unit of attention considering your needs. You go out on a date, and it's like, well, tell me about what you'd like to talk about, and then I'll tell you what I'd like to talk about. Now, this would be a balanced relationship. You give someone a gift on their birthday, and they give you a gift on your birthday, and there's a symmetry there. There's a balance. But let's say mom has a dad who's traumatized. Now, what is trauma? It's a biological message that your life is in danger. Now, this is an equation, so it can be a wide range of things, but within this equation of trauma, you have many ways of building up to there. So first of all, in a capitalist culture, where you are shamed and treated like shit and homeless if you don't have money, money plus threat of loss of money equals trauma. We are a biological mammalian species. And what mammals know, our ancestors are chimpanzees, monkeys, in that range. And what chimpanzees, monkeys know is that they are safer in the pack. That the predator, the tiger, the lion, that's going to eat any monkey they can get a hold of, is best protected by being in a group. So you have group equals safety slash individual equals unsafe. Okay? So that's the first equation. But now we've got another equation which says that shame equals social phenomena of exclusion. You've crossed this social taboo, and it's very important to understand that shame can be completely arbitrary. Some would say it is entirely arbitrary, but it certainly can be completely arbitrary. Now, we like to think of our cult, our culture, as being intelligent and really the only way of doing things, certainly the best way of doing things. We love that because it's what we know. And the unknown equals trauma. So we have unknown equals trauma. Why are children terrified of the dark? Because it's the unknown, and it's a reality that our worst nightmares, our worst fears, our worst pains and griefs and you name it, they're all out there in the unknown. They're in the unknown. And that's why the unknown equals trauma. Now, of course, the brain slants to the negative there because our dreams, our beautiful possibilities, the most amazing things we could imagine, they're also in the unknown. But particularly when you have abuse as a child, the unknown gets populated with your fear, not with the majestic, not with the beautiful. So, you know, the unknown contains everything. You cannot imagine it as bad as it can get outside the bounds of your imagination. And this is why horror movies that are any good, they always suggest and they leave it to your imagination to feel like, wow, it could be this bad or it could be even worse. Something out there in the unknown. Now, when you're hurt when you're young, the unknown is the threat because you didn't see it coming. You're innocent. You're 2 years old and then you get hit or, daddy pours some whiskey down you or something, and it's unknown. And it's shocked. It's like, well, who knows? I had no idea it could be this painful. I had no idea they had it in them. What else don't I know? And that becomes the terror. of the unknown. Now, shame is a process of exclusion. Now, exclusion means you're not protected. You're not part of the pack that's protected from the predator. So trauma is created by exclusion. Facing the unknown, going outside your culture. You don't fit in your culture has no place for you, is a phenomena of shame. Now, the reason I pause on this is there are young women in Africa today, in remote tribes, that are being shamed if they don't allow their clitoris to be chopped off with a rusty knife. Meaning the elder women want nothing to do with the young woman who doesn't undergo that ritual, considers it a disgrace not to undergo that mutilation, considers it an honor to undergo the mutilation. Well, it's unusual for women, but young boys are having their penises chopped off every day, and we don't consider that genital mutilation. You see, it's hard to look outside your cult and really think, well, surely if it's been going on for thousands of years, the protection from the unknown, it's familiar. The devil you know is worth more than the devil you don't. So it's familiar. Surely, if they've been chopping young girls' clitorises off with rusty knives for thousands of years, and if they've been chopping penis foreskins off for an equal number of times, surely it's got to be the thing to do. And while it's interesting to look at these things because just imagine you grew up in a cult that didn't chop off penis tips or clitorises. And just imagine how they'd feel if you go over there and say, wait a minute, don't cut off their clitorises. This is barbaric. And they say, what do you mean? It's our tradition. It's healthy. It does this and this and this. It's what we've been doing for thousands of years. Well, would you say, okay, fine, I was wrong. Sign me up. Chop off my clitoris. No, because you're outside the cult. You haven't built the biological connection that says that I belong to these people because I've been protected by these people. They've kept me safe. So if they want to chop my penis off or chop off my clitoris, go right ahead. The point is that not every cult tradition is intelligent. That's what makes it a cult. It's just done because it's done because it was done before. And who knows at what point and in what situations these things get started. Because the seeds of things can come from a variety of values. Some tribes, for example, initiate their young with an extraordinary ordeal, which Joseph Campbell would call the hero's journey. And in order for the child to become an adult, they have to endure this ordeal. And once they endure the ordeal, they are now considered an adult. And the ordeal is designed to create an altered state, to initiate trauma, to hopefully have the child survive the trauma, but it's not a guarantee. You know, if you send a young child out to make a kill with a lion with a sphere, and if they come back with the lion, they're a man. it's not clear they're going to come back with the lion. The lion may eat the kid. But if they survive the ordeal, they are considered an adult. Because they've gone through trauma, they've met their worst fear, they've endured excruciating pain, and they've got to know some part of themselves that is bigger than all that. In a number of our cultural ancestors, some of the 10,000 cultures in human history, feel that someone can't be trusted, someone can't be a man, someone can't be a woman, until they've met the part in themselves that is bigger than all that pain, that survived the ordeal, and is welcome as a hero with that knowledge and with that gift back into the tribe. Well, we do the exact opposite, as Jonathan Haidt in The Coddling of the American Mind talks about the way we're raising a culture of infants who can't cope and deal with reality, but who would never in 1,000 years cut off a clitoris, who'd happily cut off a penis. A little bit of sexism there. But no, that's not sexism. That's what? Taking care of their health? Ask the screaming child what that's about. So you have this dance here. And when an adult or a grown-up does not learn and does not master trauma, when their fears presented themselves and they could not face those fears, their body keeps them in an endless loop of alerting them that they're not safe, of alerting them that the world is not safe, of alerting them that they are in a sociopathic world they don't know how to deal with. So trauma minus coping skills equals biological messages of you're going to die, you're going to die, you're going to die, equals self-absorption. Why? Well, what do you think when someone says you're going to die? What do you think when someone says you're going to die? Do you think, wow, I really better pay attention to them while they're making tea? I should compliment them on how nice the tea is. Or do you think, oh my God, I'm going to die, fuck the tea? When you think you're going to die, do you say, wow, you made your bed well, little girl? Or do you think, okay, that's nice, I got to get focused back on how I'm going to not die? Well, when one person's trying to connect and one person is in trauma, focused on how they're going to stop dying, equaling both people focusing on the person, because you have to understand that people who think they're going to die they not only focus 100% on themselves, but they demand that everyone else does. Hey, I'm going to die. Hey, I'm going to die. Pay attention to me. I'm here. I'm going to die. I need this. I need this. I need this. Now, it would be nice in a trauma-literate culture for mom, dad, granddad, whoever, your lover, to come up to you and say, hey, I've got messages going off in my body about trauma. My mind says I'm not going to die. But you see, there were several moments in my life where things were so big and I couldn't face them. And I'm sure they're going to come again because I haven't dealt with them. And I don't know what to do. And I'm terrified they're going to come again. And my body is telling me I'm going to die. And I don't know how to deal with this. And the reality is I can't pay attention to a word you're saying because I'm so terrified of dying. And even if I'm not conscious of this all the time, my anxiety is running in the background. And even if I can't name it, my attention is moving around compulsively because I'm overwhelmed by the anxiety. And even though I can't, I'm just completely self-absorbed, one. And two, in my self-absorption, I need everyone to focus on me. Why? Well, going back to the root, trauma and anxiety, it's healthy for everyone to focus on the person who's going to die. A kid walks in the door, half leg chopped off. Help! It is intelligent for everyone in that room to drop everything, call the ambulance, get the amputated leg from the street, get them to the doctor and get them back to good thing before they focus on, oh, my dinner, my this and that and the other. That's healthy. The trouble with trauma in an emotionally and trauma illiterate culture is that the amputated leg never gets acknowledged, never gets named, never gets confronted, never gets healed. Everyone runs away from it and pretends it doesn't exist, like the pink elephant in the room. And so the biology, the body is watching that and saying, you're going to die, you're going to die. You haven't gotten the message, you haven't gotten the message, you haven't gotten the message. It's like, what message? Nobody's talking about anything. Because let's say the trauma was economic. Okay, and now you have enough money. You're not going to die this month. But what about next month in a culture that will throw you out in the street? If you have a big medical bill, what about next month? You see that it hangs there because the culture hasn't resolved it. The community hasn't resolved it. And the person hasn't resolved it. We have the kind of culture that when someone gets sick, there's probably several people that say, good, I never liked that person anyway. Now they're sick and that's the way it is. Well, that's not a culture when you have so many people getting sick and so many people seeing people getting sick. And the statistical odds are that you're going to get sick with something. It could be unemployment, it could be a broken back, it could be a horseback accident, it could be someone rides into you as an uninsured motorist. It could be. But odds are you're going to experience that lion in this culture. And that unlike the tribes of a few hundred years ago, they're not going to rally around and protect you from the lion. They're going to throw you to the beast and say, you're a loser. You see, they didn't do that in small tribal bands. In other words, those primitive people took care of their own in some ways better than we do. So we're like, oh, the barbarity of cutting off a clitoris with a rusty knife. How tormenting, how cruel. course, we do it with our penises, but that's another story. We do sanitary choppings and all this, and then how barbaric they are, not dressing in advertised clothes that our local racketeers have convinced us that we're worthless if we don't wear, however discomfortable they might be. I mean, how primitive they are, right? But they could actually take care of their own and the trauma would go down. You're safe, we'll protect you. Can you say the same thing on your street? How many people will protect you on your street if you go down financially? That's a trauma. If you end up on the street, that's a trauma. If you get shamed on social media, that's a trauma. Who's going to rally round? It's not clear that the tribe is there in our culture. And so we have a lot of anxiety because it's not clear how we're going to survive when we're cast out of the pack in a culture that guarantees that you will be cast out at one point or another for some reason or another. So when it doesn't get resolved, the self-absorption becomes chronic. When it's invisible, it doesn't get attended to. Now, it's invisible because we're a trauma illiterate, emotionally illiterate culture. There's some cultures that the women and the men danced and talked with feelings a third of the time. Social bonding time, presence time, connecting, learning, practicing, initiations. Not today. Not today. We pay people who have us lay down in couches. We venture in cautiously into certain feelings and they sit there with their clipboards and you pay them some money. That's our form of integration and bonding. To some it would seem barbaric, but one's own cult never seems barbaric to those in the cult. So you've got a chronically self-absorbed dad because he's experienced enough trauma that didn't get dealt with, that his body's constantly telling him, you got to do this and this or you lose your money, you got to do this and this or you won't be liked here, you got to do this and this and you won't be able to attract a woman, you can't do this and this. There's all these different survival things because, when you can't create a mate, something very few mammals have a problem with. But we have large segments of men, for example, in the United States that cannot attract a mate. A mammalian crisis. Lions don't have to deal with this. Giraffes manage it just fine. Gazelles, baboons, raccoons, deer. No problem attracting a mate. That's not the case for noticeable percentages of men in America. They feel unwanted, excluded, and it's an incredible insult to one's value because it basically says that your pattern won't be continued to another generation because nobody values it. This is incredible pain. Well, it leads to self-absorption. What do I have to do? What's wrong with me? Da-da-da-da-da. Now, the trouble is, you have a child, it's a much smaller energy, who depends on this energy field to survive, for security, for survival, for love and belonging. Only they can't love and belong because they're too self-absorbed. And they're too self-absorbed to fully focus on what it is the child needs and to learn regulation skills. And so the child learns that the only way that they're going to get anything they need is to try and use up their own attention and needs to fill a bit of this hole. So the child pays all of their attention to the narcissist, the person who's locked in a self-absorbed state. Now, it's a little bit different from narcissism, but it has the same effect. The narcissist is enamored with themselves and how beautiful they are. The self-absorbed person is focused on constant anxiety about survival. So they're constantly anxious about their survival, which means that everyone around them, any child particularly, is worried about their survival, because if they don't survive, they don't get their needs met. So now this child is constantly asking the question, what does mom and dad need right now? How can I stop them from being anxious? So a child will start lying because they'd say, oh my gosh, if I told my mother this, she'd get anxious. So when a stranger rapes the child, she doesn't tell the parent because she doesn't want to upset the already hysterical parent. So now she's dealing with it alone. So she's dealing with her parents' emotions and anxiety. She's dealing with being invisible, and she's making herself invisible to protect the parents' feelings. Okay, so far so good. The parent cooperates with these quid pro quo exchanges. Okay, you give me your, give me all of your life, basically, and you let me suck you dry, and I'll keep you alive. Okay, it's working for that. So this child doesn't get any attention, doesn't get to exist, doesn't get to feel valuable, doesn't get to feel seen. This child is alone. They grow up in this environment chronically because the trauma in a trauma-illiterate culture never gets resolved, so the self-absorption never gets resolved. And if you attack the self-absorbed person in a traumatized state, they just go into more self-absorption. Oh my God, I'm going to die. And now you point this out to me. You point out that I'm self-absorbed. You're turning on me when I'm going to die. How could you do this to me? How could you do this to me? How could you do this to me? Here I am barely making it. I don't know from day to the next if this and this. And you think da-da-da-da-da. And it becomes all about the self-absorbed person. Because that's healthy for a person in trauma. What's the problem is that trauma in our cult isn't resolved. There's plenty of things that create it. There's plenty of things that make it worse. There's plenty of things that traumatize people for being traumatized. As in the child that starts screaming and gets whacked by the parent for screaming about the trauma they're screaming about. And you learn, okay, that original thing doesn't get resolved. I don't get to communicate it and I don't get helped. In fact, if I speak up, I'll get a bigger trauma. Why? Because the parent is self-absorbed. The parent isn't interested in the feeling of that child. The parent is interested in the fact that the screaming distracts them from being self-absorbed. Because, look, I'm trying to get us to survive in this and that and the other, and I'm doing this and I'm doing that, and da 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 da, and with you screaming, I won't survive. And so, shut the fuck up. This is all about me surviving. Now, included in that can be a generosity of like, I've got to take care of you, you fucking brat. you know, shut up, I've got to make money for both of us. I can't make it, I can't make it. So we're dealing with constant trauma leading to constant self-absorption. Well, even if this lets up, you see, okay, so you have a few months where there's no money pressure. The brain that's been living in money pressure for 10 years is wondering when the next thing is going to happen, is certain, and in fact is feeling unsafe, back to the fear of the unknown. It's like, what's going on that I don't have money pressure? What's the new threat about that? I don't know. It's out there in the unknown. I've never done this before. It's terrifying. I remember the panic attack that came to me when I had more money in the bank, debt-free, than I'd ever had before. And I suddenly realized I could do anything I wanted. And I had a panic attack because it took me into the unknown. It brought up, and then I had all these fears, like I'm going to waste it, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Now, I hadn't had any of those fears when I was broke. I hadn't had any of those fears when I was in debt. But when I had more money than I'd ever had, and I felt like, oh my gosh, what do I have to do with this? I felt terrified. And then I felt more terrified because I was terrified, because it's like, oh my gosh, I'm sure I'm going to spend all this money, because if it makes me so anxious to have this money, I'm sure I'll just get rid of it and then I'll feel like a complete fool again. So, and I'd look at this and it's like, wow, it's interesting. So even sometimes when you have an opening, a new reality, it brings up the fear of the unknown, fears of failing. And so there's this phenomena of worrying about and exaggerating future problems even when they don't exist right now, just to maintain the stability of the self-image, the stability of the identity, which is one of the things that protects us from chaos. When we're traumatized, the fear is of not knowing anything, being helpless, out of control, in an overwhelming space, and gonna die. That's the greatest terror, and being all alone in that. It's the greatest terror the human mind can create. And our self-image gives us a little bit of a protection, because, whether we're a cynic or a bully or whatever it is that we're doing, it's like, well, I know this part of myself. I've seen this part before, and this is what I do, and I always do this, so I can relax, because even if I make a complete mess of it, I'll still be in familiar terrain, because I've made messes of things before with this quality. And so what's the big deal? But going back to little Jenny here, who is constantly giving all of her attention to her dad rather than to herself, and rather than dad giving his attention to her so that she grows up as a whole human being. She grows up not existing, with secrets to protect her dad, secret feelings that she won't tell him because it would make him feel bad, lies. Oh, little Jenny, I feel so bad. I know I'm a self-absorbed, shitty, alcoholic father, and I feel so bad. No, says little Jenny. No. Let's lie, right? Let's go invisible. We're not going to say, yes, Dad, you're absolutely right. It is absolutely heartbreaking. I feel lonely. I feel invisible. I feel exhausted. I don't feel like I can keep you happy. I don't feel safe when I don't keep you happy because you abuse me. And I've lived in this terror for the last fucking 10 years. Because that might set him off, right? Here he is being vulnerable, and she shares the truth, right? So she lies. No. No problem whatsoever. He says, surely I've done something. No, not a bit. In fact, Dad, I appreciate having a drunk for a father because of And so you have the lies. Now, every single lie makes her invisible. She stops existing because she lives in a world where every single person feels better if she doesn't exist. Because she is those feelings that she's lying about, and she is those thoughts that she's hiding, and she is those pockets of her reality that she won't tell anyone about. So she's becoming more and more invisible, and she may even lie to herself and that she's helping her father by doing this. No, it may be something that allows her to stay alive without being beaten or without feeling the panic attack that every child feels when their parent loses it. Because when the parent loses it, every child relates, particularly in regression and trauma of their own, to the fact that at 2 years old, that parent could kill them. Now the parent just has the ability to induce feelings that they're a bad person based on making the parent feel bad. So little Jenny grows up, invisible, with a habit of taking care of traumatized men. And first of all, the thing she'll be most comfortable doing is finding another man in trauma who's self-absorbed because of their trauma and taking care of them. That will be a comfortable place for Jenny because she won't need to deal with the fear of the unknown. It's very familiar. She won't be afraid of being punished and being killed because that was the deal with the abuser at some point. Don't push me over my limit. Because parents do get pushed over their limits. You know, they lost their job, their boyfriend lied and cheated with their best friend, they got shamed on social media, and that was the day that the kid had a tantrum. And that parent absolutely wants to kill that child. And they may have thoughts like, oh, where could I put the body? Who would know? And they may, not out of any love for the child, but just complete rage between these two situations. What the fuck can I do to stop being hurt by everyone? Get the fuck out of here, and this anger. Of course, this is politically incorrect, and so they have to talk about how much they love being a parent, which they hate, and so there's a lot of stuff that gets pushed down, and we just pretend in our little cult that everything's fine. Isn't it wonderful that whatever it is that we divert attention to? So she's growing up in this thing, and now there's a new little Jenny Jr. And little Jenny Jr. expects to be met by a parent, expects to be important. Little Jenny Jr. has just gone through a trauma of being born into a brand new world when she thought she was going to die. I mean, all those hips squeezing in and that liquid and this strange light and bursting out into the open and this voice and these little machines beeping. And I thought I was going to die for sure, says little Jenny Jr. And here I am with these strange people. And she wants attention to know that she's not going to be cast into that building again. And, she wants that. But here's where the equation flips. Where is it going to come from? How is Jenny Sr., who's constantly given everything to, her dad and perhaps her boyfriend or husband, and probably found a narcissistic boss who, needed this and was so noticeable of how good Jenny was of taking care of him. How's she going to have all this? Where's this magical substance of love and attention going to come from when it wasn't given to Jenny Sr.? It wasn't given. Where's it going to come from? It's tough. It's really tough. And it's normally going to replicate as a pattern for two reasons. There's nowhere for it to come from. It's familiar. And the ability to empathize for that little Jenny Jr. got killed when it was too dangerous to empathize with her own little girl as she was growing up. When in order to keep alive and not be thrown out of the family, she had to delete herself and cast that out of the family to pretend to be someone who was acceptable. Well, that part's been out there for decades. And now this little one shows up with that part that actually expects to be loved. And it makes no sense in the equation. First of all, it wrenches on the body of the mother and the psyche, because it's like trying to feed an infant with the bile that's left after you've vomited multiple times. I mean, it's just so hard to get anything out there that has any nourishment. When you do, it leaves you completely empty. So the mother may turn to drink, get something there, some other addiction, an affair. So you can turn outside to fill this void. The mother can become more and more invisible, not explaining to anyone what's going on in a cult that won't listen. Or she can just dump it onto a child again. Why not just keep the pattern alive? Because every time she is self-absorbed herself and makes her daughter fill in the gap, every time she does that, she feels better. Now finally the equation balances out. Okay, so I took care of dad, and I took care of husband, and I took care of narcissistic boss, and now my daughter will take care of me. Okay, finally. I mean, you can't just keep losing money. You can't deduct $1 for dad, deduct $1 for husband, deduct $1 for boss, deduct $1 for self, because you're lying to protect these patterns. And then you're already 1, 2, 3, 400% in debt. There's no money to give the child. So the child becomes the +1 that moves this a little bit in the right direction, and the child grows up feeling completely inadequate while giving everything, because the child can't make up for the betrayal of self, for the betrayal of dad, for the betrayal of boyfriend, for the betrayal of boss, plus all the narcissistic friends we have all around us. It can't make up, because a narcissist heads right to the person in this abuse contract and says, feed me, feed me, feed me. I'm going to die, feed me. And it's a sad equation all around. Dad is not happy, and he's empty. People are living in this underlying anxiety about money, about sex, about acceptance. We have not climbed very high on Maslow's hierarchy of needs as a culture. We cannot even say that every American will survive and is secure in their survival. These are just the first 2 needs that any mammal for the last hundreds of millions of years needed. We can't even do that, despite food being plowed underground, beside billions floating around every day. We can't tell every American that they can survive. We can't do it. We won't do it. And we transfer the shame of that cult decision onto the individual and induce trauma. As long as we induce trauma in our adults, we will induce trauma in our infants. whatever the pattern is, it creates an overwhelming debt load that sees that the pattern goes forward. And these cycles will proceed as mathematical equations. Now, there's one bright light in this mix, and it's very important because we're dealing with, dad to mom to junior. So and this just goes on endlessly. So this is person to person as an equation. Now, if you just keep going to person, losing $1 each time, you are bankrupt, dead, insane, whatever it is, you're bankrupt. So the important thing to understand is that the intergenerational family abuse cycle are not the only resources. Now, here's the problem, though, with abuse. Because abuse is one of the memes that continues generation to generation. When you're abused by mom and dad, you are abused by the archetypal deity. They represent God and Goddess. When God and Goddess abuses you, neglects you, doesn't love you, it is always about you. Because it's too unsafe to say the truth, which is I've got a fucked up set of parents in a fucked up cult that doesn't know the difference between hate and rage. It doesn't know how they work. It's a complete mess out there. Oh my God, I'm a child depending on these grown-up idiots in a completely fucked up cult. Oh my God, what am I going to do? It's too dangerous to think that thought. So the thought is always, if I was any good, I would be loved. Not if they were any good at loving, I'd be loved. If I was any good, I'd be loved. Well, since I'm not loved, I'm not any good. Well, that equation doesn't take you outside yourself. It takes you inward. Well, if inward is being eaten alive by your parents and blaming yourself for it, you're doomed. The only question is to go outward, but to go outward, you'd have to say that, no, I am good. But all these assholes around me don't know what they're doing, but I am good. Because that takes you out of yourself. Okay, these assholes don't know what they're doing, but something and someone out there might know. See, now we're transcending the individual, we're transcending the family unit, and we're looking for deity. We're looking for the beautiful unknown. But to look for the beautiful unknown, you've got to know that you're good. You're looking for something that is able and capable of loving you. And you look outside. The abused child never does that because the abused child projects the parent onto the deity. If dad whoops me with a belt so I scream and feel absolutely lonely and miserable, well, who knows what the Old Testament God would do? Safer with dad. I'll just stay in my cocoon. Now, we need to go out. We need to bring new energy in the equation. And the very big field of other, transcendent energy beyond the system, whatever that is, a religion, an energy, a miracle, a transcendent experience, new education, other cultures, other countries, healthier people, whatever it is, the world of other, out there in the unknown, requiring you to cross the threshold of trauma, to go into a place you've never been. Something that's very difficult to do when you anticipate that the only thing in the unknown, because that's what you've experienced, is shock and pain. The last thing you want to do is voluntarily go out into the unknown, but it's the thing you have to do. So you move out there into an encounter with the other. And you can find within the alchemy of the other, again, other countries, other cultures, other people, other deities, other energies, singing, transcendent experiences, self-awareness, yoga, psychedelic exploration. In the other, away from this system, is a vast and untapped resource. A vast and untapped resource that is not available within this lockdown system. And the question is, how can you confront the other, depleted and in trauma, when you're too terrified of the unknown? You can't. Until you can bring and muster the courage to face the unknown. Now, one of the interesting things with, for example, the meme of fear between parent and child is when the parent is too terrified to look at the unknown themselves. So they lie. Now, I watched my mother lie all the time when she'd face feelings in there that she didn't want to deal with. And so what she was telling me was that my protector, that all the adults around me were terrified of something in the unknown. Whatever it was, they would lie, they would cheat, they would beat, they would do anything but go into the unknown. Well, they're communicating that to me with their behavior. Now, what they didn't want to face was their own trauma and their own childhood abuse. That's out there in the unknown. When you don't integrate and sort that through, it's out there in the unknown. They don't want to face it. They don't want to face it at all costs. And so they communicate through their behavior and their facial expressions and their lies that there is something absolutely terrible that is so bad they would kill their own kid not to face it. And it's the unknown, by the way. Well, that doesn't set the kid up to have confidence to go into the unknown. It's a terrifying experience. And it's one of the reasons that travel and, moving outside the family system is such an important part of adulthood. To face and realize that the myopia, that the fears, the paranoia, etc. of the parent does not represent the entirety of the other, the entirety of the unknown. That there's just this tiny little pocket of absolute horrific pain and dread that the parent doesn't know how to deal with because they're in a cult that doesn't teach people how to deal with it. And that's it. But then there's all these gray areas and all these colors and all these magical places that are also out there in the world of other that the parent never acknowledged. Because when you cannot face your trauma and your fear, and it's out there in the unknown, you cannot face the unknown, period. Because until you're able and ready to face that, how can you deal with the rest of reality? Because it might be there. It's kind of like if you cannot face a boyfriend. I couldn't look him in the eye after what he did or whatever it is. Well, if you can't face one person for 10 seconds on the street, you can't leave the house. Because what if they're there? It's that kind of dynamic. The whole world is out there. But I might run into so-and-so. Until you deal with so-and-so and sort that out. Until you deal with so-and-so and sort that out. I can't leave the house because I don't feel confident in dealing with that. And it's that type of dynamic. So the parent always has, who hasn't because as soon as you deal with trauma, the self-absorption disappears. It may be a habit, or a self, but it disappears. People are not naturally self-absorbed. Traumatized people are in an emotionally illiterate culture. But you can travel around the world, and there's, for example, United States is a high trauma culture. You go to Denmark, it's a much lower trauma culture because there's no threat to survival. It's a socialist democracy and capitalist country. So you have the capitalist framework, and if that doesn't work, you've got the socialist framework. It's democratic. It's an incredibly amazing culture, but you don't have to worry about dying in Denmark. So the trauma threshold, that anxiety and all that, is just not there. So the amount of caring and stuff for babies is higher. You don't have this level of sources of trauma as you do in the United States. In Asia, again, the family system is stronger in many cases. So it's different. It's different in every cult, basically. You're going to do to your child and or your friends or other innocent people what was done to you by the power structure into which you were born, unless you do a lot of work and sort it out and give all that back to the power structure, or you bring in other energy into the system so that you get replenished from a source other than the abuser, that you get replenished from your own abuse to a point where you are full by the time that you have that child. If you are not full, you will take from the child what was taken from you: your innocence, your trust, your naivete, your relaxation, your wonder, whatever it is that you don't have. Because within the full spectrum of the human psyche, we have access to every point unless it's been robbed to us. When's the last time you felt joy? When's the last time you felt delighted or high energy? When's the last time you felt hate? You see, these full ranges of expression are available. And if you look at certain parts of reality closely, the full range of emotions and ways of behaving presents itself. There are certain places in the world and certain contexts where defending yourself with weapons is appropriate. If you go there, you'll die, or you will do that. In certain places in the world where incredible grief is the only intelligent emotion for the amount of wasted innocence and lost life killing and just washing away on a daily basis. And there's other places where there's complete joy and wonder. Something's been robbed if you can't access the emotions and the psychological states relating to all those different parts of our psychology.